What Andy Kaufman bit do you think best exemplifies Andy Kaufman other than Foreign Man?
Which bit is most exemplary of him?
Yeah. Or two-part, your all-time favorite.
The bit of his that I've seen the most and that I show people first, if they've never really come across his work, is when he goes from bombing into crying, into the rhythms, turning that crying into a song and then playing the conga drums with that. Like, that to me is like essential Kaufman.
Yes, that is the voice of Alex Braverman, director of the new Andy Kaufman documentary. Thank you very much. And you've tuned into another episode of Comedy History 101, where we school you in comedy. I am Harmon. Hello. Hi. And you are in for a treat. I am in for a treat. We're all in for a treat because we are going to talk with Alex about nothing but all things Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman, of course, one of the true originals of comedy, an innovator, a groundbreaker, and just plain flippin' funny. But before we jump into the episode, a few quick plugs. On Thursday, April 17th, 7 p.m. at Young Ethel's in Park Slope, I'll be presenting my show Jokey Okie, stand-up comedy karaoke in a 3-round game show, which is also very Kaufman-esque. And on Sunday, 4/20, at the People's Improv Theater, I'll be presenting my show AI versus Human Roast Battle 420 edition. Yes, come out and see a human rapper take on AI stoner Abe Lincoln in a comedy roast battle of tomorrow. And on Friday, April 25th, 7 p.m. at the Red Room, I'll be presenting my show Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. No hokey gimmicks, no dumb themes. Tale brings you the best in New York storytelling. And you can find out all about my show dates on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at harmonleon. And of course, show Comedy History 101 some love, that you care. We want to hear from you. Give us a few stars or comments on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast, because it really helps keep the podcast going. And we love bringing you such great episodes, such as what we have today on Andy Kaufman and the documentary. Thank you very much. And you can find out all about our back episodes on our site, comedyhistory101.com, or on Instagram at comedyhis101. And now, without further ado...
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone! Excuse me!
Comedy History 101.
Ladies and gentlemen, so far everything I have done for you tonight, really I am only fooling. This is really me. And everything else was just a character.
We used a mirror, and people didn't like what they saw a lot of the time.
I would still like to know who the real Andy is.
Alex, nice meeting you. I have seen the documentary twice, and for me, any day you get to talk about Andy Kaufman is a good day for me.
Me too, for the most part. I'm excited to talk to you, and it is one of my favorite subjects as well.
Well, so much so that you made a whole documentary about it.
Yeah. Exactly. It's one of those things where if you're not obsessed with your documentary subject, you'll probably go insane.
Yeah, when did Andy first come on your radar? What per se was the first Andy Kaufman bit that you remember?
It's a good question. I mean, I think the first thing I ever saw was the Carnegie Hall special. And what sticks out in my mind more than anything from that special was the milk and cookies ending. As a kid, learning about that kind of blew my mind. And obviously, I was more interested in the milk and cookies than the show when I was probably 6 or 7 years old when I saw it.
Before I said that if you're all good, we're all going to go out for milk and cookies. Well, I've hired, okay, now you've all been very good, really have. Okay, and I'd like to take you all out for milk and cookies now. So if you'll all please, in an orderly manner, there's 20 buses out waiting for you outside. Wait.
And then, of course, like Mighty Mouse was an early one that was introduced, but I was always just as fascinated by the kinds of things that I was hearing about him doing off stage and off camera just as much as I was on stage, meaning like, working at Jerry's Deli or...
Yeah, for people that don't know, he actually worked as a busboy at the height of Taxi. Am I correct on that one?
Exactly. And I think he was also at other times working at a place called Posh Bagel doing this exact same thing. So... But yeah, his antics were just as exciting and interesting to me as his bits.
Yeah, I think one thing I learning from your documentary and then diving into it further, that he was really good friends, if not dated, performance artist, musician, Laurie Anderson. And then it's like, yeah, that all makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think they dated. I think that they were just friends, and collaborators to a certain extent. But yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So let's say, a person not familiar with Andy Kaufman just landed on planet Earth. How would you describe to them the comedy entity, which is Andy Kaufman?
Well, for someone who's just landing on planet Earth, I guess
there'd be a lot to acclimate to.
Yeah. If they're not familiar with everyone else that's also doing comedy or performance, it might actually make more sense than anything, because he's just an anomaly. But I would say, to someone that is familiar with comedians or performers or musicians at that time, he was a complete oddity in that part of his act was playing against our perception or expectation of what a performer or comedian or musician should be doing, and then sort of flipping that on its head and making the act itself about our own expectations and our own discomforts and the contract that we have with performers. I'm an audience member. I'm here to sit here and be entertained, and you're up there to tell me jokes and make me laugh. And I think he was just sort of someone that was comfortable challenging those expectations and making us think about that relationship a little bit more carefully.
Yeah, I mean, I think of him more like a performance artist in the stand-up world, using the stand-up stage for performance art. And
Yes.
Again, it was such kind of a revolutionary time in general for comedy. You had Richard Pryor coming up, Robin Williams, Steve Martin, at his height, and Pee Wee Herman. So, and again, if it's like jazz, it was like kind of in that almost breeding ground of, innovators changing the previous generation's era of comedy.
Yeah. I mean, well, all those people that you mentioned are people that, we're talking about them still because they were original and they were doing something a little bit different, or making us think about things in a slightly different way. And of course, Andy's kind of in a league of his own because he was even more out there than others, but all of them are people that sort of change the way that we look at storytelling and humor, and again, the relationship between audience and performer. The word, they were on the vanguard, so to speak.
Yeah, and again, Andy beyond obviously loved wrestling.
You know what, Mr. Lawler? I've heard all these things you've been saying about me on television. You want to wrestle me? You want to wrestle me, Memphis style? All right, fine. I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Lawler, because let me tell you something. True, I only wrestle women, but I've wrestled women that are a lot bigger and stronger than you.
Do you think like wrestling not so much the wrestling, but the approach of wrestling, where you have the face and the heel was sort of always his catalyst.
Well, you know, looking back at his career, knowing that he ultimately spent the latter part of it focusing on wrestling, you start to realize that so much of his career was wrestling, in a sense, whether he's playing the good guy or the bad guy or whatever, but he's trying to get the audience's full attention by essentially putting on a show that makes you wonder, like, is this real or not? Which that's the primary function, if not, you know, the appeal of wrestling, right? Like, you have these characters that are sort of archetypes. One's the good guy, one's the bad guy, and they're going at it, and you kind of don't really know which way it's going to go or what's going to happen, and you're, you know, whether you're rooting for the heel or the baby or not is kind of beside the point. You're just fully enveloped in this story that's taking place in front of you, and so, you know, whether he's Lafka or Tony Clifton or Elvis or the wrestler, like, that's to a certain extent what he's doing. He as his friend Bob Pagani puts it in the movie, you know, you're performing for an audience that doesn't know it's watching a show.
And again, with Laka or Foreign Man turning into Elvis, that's the villain, the heel, and the face all in one performance.
Absolutely.
Now, last but not to be the least, I would like to imitate the Elvis Presley.
Thank you very much.
It was the wrestling angle. Was that how you got Rick Rubin involved as working with you as executive producer on the documentary?
I mean, Rick Rubin is a huge wrestling fanatic, and I know that he at one time owned his own small league. I want to say it was like the Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I'm not sure. I don't know the full name. I have to look it up, but I think he's just a Kaufman fan in general, and that's obviously a huge piece of it. But he is a fan of his work through and through. But to answer to the question of how he became involved, like, he's friendly and close with Morgan Neville, who was one of my producers. They worked together on the show about Rick called Shangri-La, which was on Showtime, which is an incredible 4-part series. And that's how they knew each other, and that's how he got involved.
And one thing, what did you learn about Andy that you didn't know before coming into this project?
Well, I always knew he was a big meditator, but I didn't realize that he was a TM teacher until getting involved in this and sort of talking to the people that he was close with in that community. I'm trying to think what else. It's hard for me to separate my knowledge of him now with before, since I've just been, you know, living and breathing this for 8.5 years straight. So I don't remember.
Oh, wow. So this was an 8.5 year production? Like,
it's from start to finish. Yeah.
wow.
From the moment I had the idea to the moment it being released in theaters is 8.5 years.
Tell us about that journey. And then I have a couple questions about his TM experience.
Well, I mean, 8.5 years ago is when is when it occurred to me that this hadn't been done. And it took a little bit of time to find Bob and Lynn and get in touch with them and arrange for an interview with them. That's how I started. And so that was in October 2016. That's when I started having this idea. May 2017 is when I shot those interviews with the two of them that are in the movie. And then, you know, from there, the process was basically taking what material was out there that I could find and cutting something together with that material and those interviews to put together like a trailer, like a teaser, to try to raise money. And it took years and years and years to put the money together for this film. There were a lot of people that were very interested in it at various times. And you know, there were a lot of people that probably wished that they could have financed it. But, you know, with there being a perception out there in the world that this had already been done, which isn't true, but, between Man on the Moon and Jim and Andy, there was a sense that, we've seen a lot on this guy already, regardless of whether or not he's had a definitive documentary solely on him and his career. And so it ultimately took finding partners, someone named Jen Westfall and Joe Plummer at this company, Wavelength. They were the first ones to sort of look at the creative, look at the fact that I had put together this team that included Safdie brothers, and understand that this had value, artistically and commercially. And they're the ones that ultimately, in 2021 or 22, they're the ones that actually like stepped up to the plate and financed the film. And so from basically the beginning of 2022 until the end of the summer 2023, that was like production and post-production. So that's when all the interviews or the additional interviews and editing took place, as well as going through the bulk of the archive. So once we had the money, it was sort of off to the races, but it just took a long time to raise the money.
And was there an archive footage that you haven't seen before that blew your mind that's in the documentary?
Yeah, I mean, like some of the stuff that you see in the very open of the film, like black and white home video footage, that was stuff that was shot by one of Andy's roommates in the 70s. That's just really, candid, not rehearsed, just him hanging out at home and sort of being playful. A lot of the backstage footage with him and Bob Zamuda, some of the footage of Tony Clifton I hadn't seen before giving interviews. And then, of course, there were interviews that we came across that Bob and Lynn had conducted with people like George Shapiro and Andy's father, that those are very powerful as well. And those are things I hadn't seen.
Yeah, that story about his grandfather is just heartbreaking. Just in brief, it was like they didn't tell his grandfather passed away. They was just like on vacation. So we just go to the window every day. Do you think that was part also? Well, obviously you're some of your parts, but of his comedy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a unique experience to lose a grandparent. Like anyone that's lucky enough to have grandparents to begin with is going to experience that loss. And I don't think it's actually that unique to be told, to have death explained to you in a way that's not fully direct or honest if you're of a certain age. But I think that the way that affected him was unique and significant. The fact that, they were so close to begin with, that, his absence, his grandfather's sudden absence, that had an impact on him. And I don't think it was some great trauma that ruined him or anything, but I think when he learned about death later on, and he learned that he had been living in a fantasy world where his grandfather was still alive, only to later learn that wasn't true. I think, later in life, he took that lesson with him and was able to create worlds for people where they were able to believe certain things without them being true or not. And it was a powerful lesson. So I definitely don't want to give the impression that I think that this was like a horrible trauma that like ruined him forever. But I think it's an idea that he carried with him that carries some significance with it along the way.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
Yeah, and with the TM, like his meditation, which I didn't really know about before watching the documentary, it just sort of makes sense when you see him like fully commit to eating ice cream on stage and being in that moment, or just his commitment to character and not breaking, say if he's reading Great Gatsby.
So anyway, it's called The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and here it is, Chapter 1.
One of his long burn bits where, like, say he's in a sleeping bag for an extended period of time. To me, that just connected the dots between TM being immersed in the moment and not breaking, and those bits.
Yeah, I mean, they're both like his commitment to TM and his experimentation meditation with time, like there's absolutely a strong connection there of like going deep, being in the present, like really feeling that like razor's edge of time, like and I think the effect that he had on the audience when he was doing that stuff, it's almost like the less he's doing, the more attention he has on him, and so it's hard to talk about the connection between these two things. But once you realize how committed he was to this practice of meditation every day, like the more his act starts to make sense to me in a certain way. Like he's drawing you in, and like all of your other distractions are sort of fading away, and you're just solely focused on what is he doing? Why is he doing it? And there's a sense of like hypnosis or enchantment that comes with that.
There's like a misnomer that, or maybe not a misnomer, that he wanted the audience not to enjoy his performance. But then I saw like this clip from like backstage at the Catskills where they hated him. He was like distraught like any comedian.
It's the first time that's happened to me in years, and I think that's just downright rude. Those people were so rude out there. And so anyway, I went on and I did what I was going to do anyway. And I went on with the show, and I did it for them, and I was professional about it. But gosh, I felt like telling them they were rude. They were just so...
I mean, do you think that's a misnomer? I mean, I take this from like a Sex Pistols quote where they just said, we're going to do what we do. We don't care what you think about it. Do you think it was more so that, or he really cared that they did enjoy it on some sort of level?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know him, and so it's hard for me to say. This is pure speculation, but I think that if you were there and you were paying attention and you were having a genuine reaction to what he was doing, then that's positive. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of, if you went to a wrestling match and you hated the bad guy, you hated the heel, that meant that he was doing a good job. Or if you go to a wrestling match and you love the good guy, you love the baby, that means that he was doing a good job. Or if you love the bad guy, like I just think at the end of the day, he was trafficking in attention. He was seeking real reactions. And so, maybe getting up and walking out because you're bored, that I don't think he would have loved that. But I haven't heard too many stories of him being concerned with the audience's reaction, as long as they were having one.
And what Andy Kaufman bit do you think best exemplifies Andy Kaufman other than Foreign Man?
Which bit is most exemplary of him?
Yeah, or two-part, your all-time favorite.
I mean, I love the wrestling stuff because it's just so confusing and uncomfortable, and it's very physical. Like it's very he's really putting himself out there, and it's just so topical. I think the way that people react to it tells you a lot about those people. But the bit of his that I've seen the most and that I show people first, if they've never really come across his work, is when he goes from bombing into crying, into the rhythms, turning that crying into a song and then playing the conga drums with that. Like that to me is like essential Kaufman.
Every time I try to go to
Yeah, absolutely. And what was your take on the Jim Carrey movie, or Jim Carrey's performance in Man in the Moon, which I guess in the trailer, you have people asking, who is the real Andy Kaufman? So let's go with that first. I mean, do you think that was a cartoonish portrayal of who the real Andy Kaufman was? Or from your research, what would you think is the real Andy Kaufman?
Well, Man on the Moon is the reason that a lot of people my age know who Andy Kaufman is. It came out, I want to say like 97, 98, 99, something like that. I was a teenager at the time. And that movie like kept his legacy and, kept the mythology around him going and kept it alive. So I'm, incredibly grateful to it for that reason. And I also think it's a great script, and I think it's a well-directed film, and the performance is incredible. At the same time, Jim Carrey at that point is like a superstar and already such a force and has such a strong identity that you have to really, no matter how good the performance is, you have to be able to see through that in order to like get to the heart of Kaufman in that movie. And it's the same thing, if you're talking about the movie like Ray or Walk the Line or this new Bob Dylan movie that just came out with Timothée Chalamet called Complete Unknown. It's like the audience has to do a little bit of work there to like get past the Chalamet of it all, which, all those people that I mentioned, all those movies that I mentioned, like, I think that those actors did as good or, better job than anyone else could have done, but it's still a scripted film when at the end of the day, like my reaction to those films is I want to go home and listen to Bob Dylan or watch Bob Dylan videos or, same with Johnny Cash or in this case, Andy Kaufman. So I love those films, and I'm really, Jim Carrey is amazing. As a documentary person, a documentary filmmaker, my reaction to them is always the same, which is I want to go dive deeper into the original material.
Yeah. I always want to, if I see like a biopic, just find out what documentaries are out there. Just a few last questions here. What do you think Andy Kaufman would think of Thank You Very Much?
I have no idea what he would think of the movie itself, but given that he told Lynn at the end of his life that, he wanted her to keep his work alive, I think he'd be glad that people still know who he is and are talking about him and think he's a relevant person to be speaking of in our contemporary age. But the movie is mainly made up of his performances, so I think he would like that.
Yeah. Just lastly, this is a broad stroke question. What do you think Andy Kaufman's place is in comedy history, being this podcast is comedy history?
Well, that's maybe more a question for you. What do you think?
I think he was a game changer. He brought performance art into the stand-up world, and he changed our perceptions, and it's always about deconstructing comedy. And he was the first one to be in a quote unquote anti-comedy that begot, more contemporary comedians like your Neil Hamburgers and whatnot. And plus it's just so enjoyable to watch. Like there was this clip I only recently discovered where he's on Letterman's daytime show. I think you saw just like a glimpse of it in the documentary, where he has like a runny nose and he has nothing to plug and he's all sweaty. And then he just starts panhandling in the audience. And again, it's like what you were saying, is just flipping the expectations on people's heads of what a celebrity is or a comedian or a person on stage should or shouldn't be doing. That's just my take.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't have said it better than that. I think he's someone that opened up our idea of what can be done on stage and off stage.
Exactly. And lastly, what are you working on next? What are you following up Andy with?
I don't know yet. I'm still focused on promoting this and getting people to watch it. And I have some ideas for things, none of which are comedy related, I'm sad to report. But yeah, still too soon to say, as annoying of an answer as that is.
No, that's all right. But tell us where people can find the documentary. I know it's showing here in New York. We're about elsewhere and whatnot.
Well, I think if you go to, I want to say drafthousefilms.com/thank you very much. There's a list of theaters where it's currently playing, but it's also available on digital for rent or for purchase on, Apple TV Plus or Amazon or Google Play or Fandango at home, anywhere you would normally rent or purchase a movie for streaming, it's available.
Very cool. Alex, so great to talk to you. And I love the documentary. I love Andy Kaufman, and it was just really enjoyable to watch. And thank you for capturing Andy.
Well, man, thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
And that wraps up our episode on Thank You Very Much and the history of Andy Kaufman. And once again, the quick plugs. Thursday, April 17th, 7 p.m. at Young Ethel's Jokioki. Sunday, April 20th, 420 at the Pit. AI versus Human Roast Battle. Come out and see the 420 edition, where a human rapper takes on AI stoner Abe Lincoln in a comedy roast battle of tomorrow. And on Friday, April 25th, 7:30 at the Red Room, Tale, NYC's finest storytelling. And you can find out all about my show dates on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at harmonleon. And also all our back episodes of Comedy History 101 on our site, comedyhistory101.com, or on Instagram, comedyhist101. Give us some stars, give us some comments, give us some likes. And until next time, bye-bye.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone! Excuse me!
Comedy History 101.